somebody came to them and said, listen, Bob Hope is coming. This is in the summer of 79, coming to do a celebrity golf tournament. And Billy Casper says, I think we could really promote family history because Billy was a professional golfer, lived here in Utah. And he says, let's do a family history and present it to him while he's here.
Stories That Live in Us is a podcast that inspires you to form deep connections with your family, past, present, and future. I'm Krista Cowan, known online as the Barefoot Genealogist. I've spent my whole life discovering the power of family history, and I know that sharing the stories that live in you can change everything. When you start exploring your own family history, those stories that live in you just come to life. You connect with them in a very real way. But as a professional genealogist, or anybody who starts to explore the family history of friends or extended family members, there's a whole new set of stories that starts to become a part of us. My guest today is George Ott. George and I have been colleagues for more than a decade. I have heard around the Ancestry office the stories that he tells, and he does it in such a beautiful and engaging way. But what I've learned from my time with George is that when you really just want to hear the story and move into that experience, it can be super emotional. But there's also something important about having tangible representations of those stories. And I'm curious to hear from you after you hear from George, what that looks like in your life. What are the tangible representations of the stories that live in us? George, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited.
Good. Well, I think what I'd like to have people hear from you first is a little bit about how you got into family history. What was it that was a spark for you to pull you into that?
So I was attending Colorado State University I went there in 1970 as a really young kid. I was only just barely turned 17. I was born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey, went out to Colorado State. And while I was there, at the end of my freshman year, I joined the LDS Church and had my first institute class there, which happened to be family history. And I caught the bug, right? Caught the bug. And so that when I graduated and came to Salt Lake City, I couldn't get a job in my field, which was in forestry and wildlife management. And but I kept doing genealogy, and there was a gal in my LDS ward by the name of Miriam Cropper who was an accredited genealogy. She says, you really want to do genealogy professionally, don't you? I said, yeah. And this was in 1975. And she said, there's a new company starting up called Genealogical Services. Wilma Atkins is looking for people to hire. And I went down there, and May 1st of 1975, she hired me as a professional genealogist, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. And there are some people who think you can't make a living out of this.
It was tough. I mean, I've never worked for the LDS Church. I always either worked for Wilma, and then I worked for a very short time, which we'll talk about, with Research International, and then basically was on my own after that. And it's tough to make a living doing genealogy. It is tough. And then finally, the last 12 years before I retired, I went to work for Pro Genealogist at Ancestry.com.
Yeah, so tough, but you stuck with it, and it was important.
It was important, and really enjoyed it.
I love that. Well, one of the things that I've enjoyed about knowing you over the last few years and hearing about you from our colleagues is what a great storyteller you are.
Okay. And I have a lot of them. Probably not enough. It's too many for this one show. So.
Well, maybe we'll have to have you back again. So I would just love to hear, you have a couple of stories about some celebrities that you've done some research for, right, and the impact of family history on them. So let's start with Mr. Bob Hope.
Yeah. So Genealogical Services went out of business, I think, the beginning of 79. And in 79, I went to work for Research International. Research International was run by Kendall Williams and Sue McKean. And they were really into thinking that celebrity research was a way to go. and to build family history. Roots, the TV show had happened, and family history started to really blow up, okay? And there was a lot of interest. And so they had made friends with Maury Amsterdam, who was on the Dick Van Dyke Show. And through them, through him, they started working with a lot with celebrities, or trying to work with celebrities. And hearing about this, somebody came to them and said, listen, Bob Hope is coming, this is in the summer of 79, coming to do a celebrity golf tournament. And Billy Casper says, I think we could really promote family history, because Billy was a professional golfer, lived here in Utah. And he says, let's do a family history and present it to him while he's here. He's going to be the evening of the tournament having a banquet at the Hotel Utah, and we could present it to him. So there was a group of us that took parts of the lines, and they had a friend called Robert Hesenthaler, who made these beautiful heirloom wood boxes, ingrained boxes that you opened up, and then there was rings inside for the pages. And he did one that said, thanks for the memories, because that was his theme song, right? And we did the research and found some incredible stuff. And in fact, there's one thing, his maternal grandmother, it's kind of interesting. She was allegedly raised by this family in Wales, and supposedly she had a very super wealthy real father. She was adopted into this family, and love to do the DNA now on that and figure out who she's related to. But anyway, we got this work done, went to the banquet, and there was a very tall dais, and there was probably 800 people there or whatever. And dinner started, no Bob. They said he's not feeling well. He's hoping to come down, but we hope he joins us. And we're all nervous, like, oh, we have this done. Finally, at time for about dessert, Bob comes in and everybody claps and he sits down, and there's some discussions and everything. And then Billy Casper gets up and says, Bob, I'd like you to come over here. I have something to present to you. He pulls out the Hesenthaler heirloom box, puts it on the dais, and Bob opens it up, and he's going through the pages.
In front of everybody.
In front of everybody, yeah. And all of a sudden, he had tears starting to run down his face. And you could hear a pin drop in that place. People were just really taken back because, and he says, I usually have a joke for everything, but I don't have a joke right now. He says, this is absolutely amazing, because we had photographs and maps and photographs he probably hadn't seen since he was a kid, because we had got some connections to get these photographs. And he says, I have been given so many things over the years. Think about all the things after World War II and all the things he did for countries, right? He says, I have a warehouse full of memorabilia and awards and different things. He says, this does not go into the warehouse. So this sits in my living room. He says, this means so much to me. He says, this is amazing. And people everybody was crying in that room because he was crying. And it just shows you the power of family history. It shows you how it touches people's lives, And so he says, who did this? I want to meet him. So we had a chance afterwards to sit and talk with him, and he was very gracious. And what's really interesting is about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was working at Genealogist, his daughter, he didn't have any children. They were all adopted. And his adopted daughter got in touch with Genealogist about doing some more work, and she had mentioned that they still had the box. So that's pretty cool.
It became a family heirloom.
It became a family heirloom. And that's what family history is all about, right? It's family heirlooms, and there's a place in everybody's heart that touches. So the LDS Church had heard about this, and what was done, and contacted Research International and said, Jimmy Stewart is coming to Salt Lake City to shoot in 1980 in the spring a show called Mr. Kruger's Christmas that was done for the LDS Church, and it was going to be viewed at Christmas. And they were shooting it in April and into May. And at the last day of shooting, the indoor shots were done at the ZCMI warehouse on the west side of town. They wanted to make the same type of presentation with an Hesenthaler heirloom box. So there's 4 of us. I took the Stewart line. Each of us took a grandparent line, and we put together this incredible box, this incredible history. We found pictures of him when he was at a Hollywood hostel where young actors stayed, and he was playing ping pong with Henry Fonda. We have pictures of that he hadn't seen for a long time. We found a lot of great stuff. So on the last day of shooting, they had a lot of the press there, and one of the first presidency, and Eldon Tanner, was presenting him with the box. And I stood in the back with the others, and President Tanner put the box in front of him on a little table, and he opened up. He started going through it. You know what? He started to cry. And he just said, "This is absolutely amazing." He says, this means so much to me. And he was just so overwhelmed with emotion, and tears running down his face. He says, who worked on this? I want to meet with them. So he came after the press conference. He got up, and the 4 of us and a couple other people from Research International. He said, "I want you to come with me." He says, "Okay." There's a scene in Mr. Kruger's Christmas where he walks up. Because he has dreams, right, of all these different occurrences in his life, like he's conducting the Tabernacle Choir and everything. But he has a dream that he goes to see the baby Jesus. And he's standing before the manger, and he's talking to the baby Jesus about how much he loved him. And I don't think he picked him up. I just think he stood there and looked at the baby and told him how when his wife died, how much Jesus helped him. And it was really a sweet scene, right? And so he said to us, we went in there, and there's the manger and the scene and everything. And he says, I shot part of the film in here talking to baby Jesus. He says, I told them, I hope they got it the first time, because he did it ad lib. So basically what he's doing is he was giving his feelings about Jesus, right, out of his heart. And he says, I told him, I hope you got that first shot, because I don't know if I could do that again, right? He says, he looked at us, says, you know what though? I want you to know that the feelings that I had in here was not much different than the feelings I had when I was going through that box. He says, I was just overcome with emotion. And so he talked about how much family history meant to him. One, because so many of the people that were part of his life had died previously, and we kind of brought them back to him. And so he really became friends with the leaders of the LDS Church, with Spencer W. Kimball, and basically when he died in the late 80s, or 90s, I think he died in 90. Yeah, he died in 90. I think he died in the 90s. He left his movie memorabilia to Brigham Young University, and so I thought it was quite interesting. The feelings that people have when it comes to family history.
Yeah.
I thought, man, the situation with Bob Hope and the situation with Jimmy Stewart, the same feelings are there.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
And almost instantly, like opening the box, flipping through a few pages, like not even really time to process that information.
Right.
And already that emotion is there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's amazing. And I experienced that in my own family history. Like the first time you view a record that has somebody's name on it, or see their signature on a card, or like that connection, that instant, very visceral, emotional connection. And I don't understand always why that happens.
I know.
But to have seen it repeatedly, and to see it in people who schooling their emotions as part of their profession, to
really,
have that.
that's
right?
true, right?
Yeah.
That's really true.
Yeah. And so you've done this celebrity research over time, and it's interesting because, Ancestry sponsored Who Do You Think You Are and Finding Your Roots. We do the DNA for that. And celebrity is just a hook for us, right? It's a way for us to say, hey, like, here's somebody that you're interested in. Watch a family history story about them.
Right.
And hopefully then you can have the same experience for yourself.
Exactly.
But they're people too, with families and connections, and they have those emotions as well, which I think is you beautifully illustrated.
And the thing is that anybody who really gets into family history, everybody will find a story or a person probably you're going to really connect to.
Yeah.
And it's going to touch you in your heart.
Yeah.
Because think about in history, all of the people that made us who we are, people who, how many times I've worked on research where people have lost a leg or an arm in the Civil War, right? And they still go on with life. They still are successful people. These are people that we need to recognize and have our children and grandchildren appreciate, because there's a lot of people who sacrificed and had horrible situations. I mean, how many people in our histories had 10 children and they lost 8 in infancy? And yet they pick themselves up and they go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes the connection to that story, I think, that speaks to our hearts. And sometimes it's just the example that they set, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have a story from the winter of 1993. I had a client who contacted me and said, I have this sampler, and it really means, and she explained to me the name on it, because what a sampler is.
Explain
it's
a sampler,
cross
yeah.
stitch,
Yeah.
right? Usually it has A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then the numbers, and then the name of usually girls do them when they're 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. It had the name of the gal, and the year she was born, and the where she was in New Jersey. She says, I really want you to research this and find out how we're related to her. And I says, okay. So I did it. And I had found that it went through that the sampler went through all succeeding female generations down to her. And so I explained to her how the line goes. And where, she goes, ha, exactly. She says, let me tell you. She says, I have a brother who said, sis, that sampler that you have? He goes, yeah. He says, can I have it for a while? And so my kids can enjoy it and everything. And she said, sure. So, she wasn't too concerned. 6 months, a year went by. She says, hey, can I get the sampler back? She goes, no. He says, mother meant me to have the sampler, and I'm keeping it for my family. And she said, no, it was supposed to, I have, it goes, so she says, no, it's supposed to be with the females, the oldest female. And the oldest female of each generation had it, and I had it in my research. And so basically, she says, I've had it. She says, we're going to court. And I would like you to bring your research and present it to the court so I can get the sampler back. I says, really? She says, yeah, I'll pay you to come to New Jersey. And I'm from New Jersey, right? And so I says, okay, I'll fly into Newark. I'll stay with my brother in Patterson. And then this was at a courthouse down in Camden. And it was right in the middle of winter, lousy weather, drive from Patterson down the New Jersey Turnpike to Camden, go to this courthouse. And I could hear the attorneys, his attorneys and her attorneys kind of haggling out in the hall, out in the foyer while I'm waiting. And she said, they didn't seem to come. And then she says, George, come here. She says, we're going in there and we're going to win this thing. George is here. He's got the proof. We're going to go in there and win this thing. And I felt like thinking, oh man, lady, just leave me alone. I don't want to be a part of this. So I go into this courtroom, and there's this African-American, very stately African-American judge walks in, and I'm in the back of the courtroom. And I was the first one to present my and I had this huge pedigree chart, and I'm pointing things out and explaining everything, and the judge is watching, And I thought that the defense attorney or his attorney was going to rip me up because I wasn't an accredited genealogist. I just started in the days where you just went in. He just asked me why was this done in Salt Lake City, and I just said, well, there's the Family History Library, and how long have you been doing professional research? And I said, I don't know. At that point, it was almost 30 years, And he goes, okay. So then an aunt gets up. She starts really ripping into this guy, her nephew, talking, and then she started bringing out all this scurrilous and scandalous things about him, how he was sleeping with this person and that person, and I had given him something and he didn't give it back, and she was just really going to town. And I could see the judge just going, whoa, whoa, whoa. Finally, he slaps his gavel and says, I've had it with this. He says, I'm going back to my chambers, and I think these attorneys need to really figure something out. And so I'm going, oh, good, this is going to be over. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden the bailiff gets up and says, the judge would like to see Mr. Ott in his chambers. I go, okay, and I'm kind of walking, looking back at people, and I walk in there. He's hanging up his cloak, and he said, this is really sad, isn't it? People are fighting over something like this. I says, yeah. He said, and you did pretty amazing family history work. I said, yeah. He says, you think you could do work for me? So we got talking about family history. He graduated from Temple University, and we got talking about Temple University and the people he knew and everything. And we started talking about his family history and everything. And he says, give me a card. He says, I'm really interested in maybe following up with you. He said, do you want to know what my verdict is, or what I'm going to do? I go, yeah, sure. I'm on the inside, right? He goes, I'm going to go out there, and if they don't come up with a way to figure this out, I'm going to say to them, I want the sampler turned over to the court. I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm going to give half to one, half to the other.
Okay, Solomon.
Yeah, he's done this. He even said, I'm going to do the Solomon routine. And so I says, oh, okay. So I go back out in the court, and basically he told him that. And the attorneys discussed, and he says, okay, he will give the sampler back to her if she will return this or this or that. And they had this very, 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 very crazy thing that they came up with to settle this thing. And so 2 or 3 months later, I call her back, asked her how it's going. She says, he's never returned a sampler. I think we're going back to court. But,
Wow. Family drama.
Family drama. But I'm saying is that, this is something that family has really had a meaning to this person, and it went overboard, right?
Of all the things to survive, though, right? Like, it's so interesting because family heirlooms get passed down, and sometimes there is a really clear path for how those things get inherited. And sometimes it's just a matter of who wants it more or who cares. But when you have multiple people in a family who care for all sorts of reasons, the fact that something as simpler as a piece of cloth could divide a family is really that's heartbreaking.
It is really heartbreaking. Do you have time for another story? In 1990, I got contacted by a gal by the name of Pauline Gilliland. She was older. She was in her 70s. And she said to me, you're a professional genealogist? Yes, I want to hire you because I was adopted out of this home in Los Angeles. And when I turned 21, they gave me the file about my past. And basically, I learned that my mother was a woman who was working in an orange packing plant down Orange County. I want to know if I have any half brothers or sisters, and it would mean a lot to me. And so I did the research and found out that she was part of a huge family. She had like 7 or 8 siblings, and was able to figure out and trace her forward. Found that she had one son who was killed in about 20 years earlier in an automobile accident, but she had a daughter. And so I was able to figure out where the daughter was and got all of it put together. So I said, okay, Pauline, you have a half-sister. I think you should really go about this slow because you don't want to blow this gal out of the water, and here's the information. And literally 2 days later, I get a call from this woman who was the half-sister, her son, who was an attorney. And this is the way he started out on the phone. He goes, you're the genealogist that worked on this thing for Pauline Gilliland? I said, yeah. He says, what the hell's going on? I says, whoa, guy, hold on now, calm down. He says, who's this woman? Why is she bothering my mother? Why is the story? I says, listen, Pauline's just an older woman. She wanted to find out if she had any family. She has no ill intent. And, your mother is definitely her half-sister. He says, well, I don't know about that. He says, we'll have to prove it for ourselves. If this is true, we're Christian people and we will accept her. He says, but we have to check this out. I says, you know what? I'm going to give you exactly what I started with. He says, well, my brother's a detective for the LA police force. He says he could do this research. I says, then I'm going to give you what I started with. I'm not going to help you. And so he calls me back a week later. He says, I can't believe this. He says, my brother did the research and came up with the same answer. How did you find my mother? How did you do this? I says, well, genealogists are really no different than detectives, right? He goes, this is amazing. He says, we're going to work something out here. He says, but thank you for your work and everything. So I get a call about a week or two later from Pauline. She says, I got an invite to a hotel down in Newport Beach. And she says, I'm really nervous. I'm going to meet my sister and her family. And I says, I'm really nervous about how this is going to go. I says, well, let me know. Well, she let me know because she called me midnight of the night that she had it. She says, George, you're not going to believe this, what happened. I go, okay. She says, I got to the hotel, met my sister and her two sons and their families out in the lobby. And they said, follow me. She followed them down the hall into this meeting room, and there was literally somewhere about 150 to 200 people in there who were all the descendants of all these, and they had a dinner, and they had a This Is Your Life type presentation. Her mother had just died 10 years before at the age of 94, whatever, and they presented her with photographs and pictures. And then they said, Mom, this makes sense to us now because Mom volunteered for adoption groups. She kind of hinted at different things, and really this kind of closes the loop and all makes sense. And it turns out that her and her sister went monthly for lunches after that. The two brothers and her kids did things together, and it really brought a family together. And she was calling me. She called me at midnight and was telling me all this. She's crying. I'm sitting there, laying there in bed, crying. I was so happy for Pauline. And it just shows you the power of family. And I've worked over the years on lots of these type of things, bringing families together. And I was lucky. I never had anything that was super negative, most of these went really well, People were really happy that they met a new family member, and it's really heartwarming.
It's interesting because sometimes the heirloom that we receive is another person, not just a box of things.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. It's I had do I have time to tell another one? So I was working in the library, and when I worked at the family library, I was there every day. People could kind of tell if you were a professional or just a hobbyist, right? So this guy walks up to me and says, "You're a professional genealogist, aren't you? Because you can't, advertise it or promote yourself in the family library. It's a church. The church, LDS Church runs it, and so I go, yeah." He says, "I really need some help. I've been here for a day or two, and I've been watching you, and I'm not getting anywhere." I says, "Okay." And so we made arrangements, for the financial arrangements and everything. And he says, "Here's this thing." He says, "I was adopted. I know who my mother was, and I really want to find if I have any half siblings. I says, okay. So I worked with him and everything. And to make the long story short, we figured out that he had a sister. She was in, I think, around Lake Tahoe somewhere. And he contacted her. And here's the deal. She was like 10 years old, 8 or 10 years old when he was born. Her mother was divorced and was kind of in the middle of life and had him and brought him home for about a month, trying to figure out whether she should keep him or adopt him out. And this little girl, would hold him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when she found his sister, she was so excited because she found her little brother that she cuddled, right, and held, and then was put off for adoption. And he was a very successful, he had a lot of florist shops and was really successful. She was really quite destitute, struggling health-wise and everything, and he really helped her. And they had a beautiful relationship. And but here is a case where, you know, she held him, and now she was able to get reunited with him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of stories out there like that where people need that connection to come back, get those connections back together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Thank you. George, I could sit and listen to you tell stories all day.
I got plenty more.
Like I said, we may need to have you come back again. But before we wrap up today, I mean, you've had this very long career. You're now officially retired, but I hear you're still keeping your finger in it.
Oh yeah, I'm doing contract work and client work, and so yeah, I'm keeping busy.
Good.
I can't. Who could ever give it up?
Right, for sure.
It's a bug that you have in your bloodstream for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah, for some of us, absolutely. So as you kind of look to the future, what is your hope for the future of family history, of your career as you continue to dabble in things? What any ideas?
Just what I'm hoping is that people will really, you know, one of the things right now is this world and this country is so divided.
Yeah.
Can't we? There's so many different ways we could bring people together, right? And I think family history is one. There's a whole nother story I could tell you about. I helped put together a display, huge display at the Wiesenthal Museum in L.A., Museum of Tolerance, specifically to bring people together for people for being tolerant with family history. And I did that with Billy Crystal, and that's a whole nother story we could talk about. But what I'm just saying is it just shows you that family history, right, can really soothe the savage beast and bring people together, right? And I really think that I would love to see family history grow in that area and help bring like a divided country together. I think it could do it.
Yeah, if it can bring Bob Hope to tears and have him not able to crack a joke, and
Exactly.
if it can have Jimmy Stewart reflecting on how family history makes him feel the same way a discussion with the baby Jesus makes him feel, like
Right.
there is power.
There's
there.
power. There's power there. There really is.
Well, George, thank you so much for being
Oh,
here.
this has been a lot of fun.